G'day and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, I want to show you how you can fix rhomboid pain in 4 simple steps. Now what these steps are going to touch on is there's going to be a symptomatic exercise in there to hopefully help you get on top of that rhomboid pain really quickly and really easily. But then we also need to touch on why that rhomboid pain is there in the first place. What is it about your day-to-day life? What is it about the way that your body's functioning that's asking those rhomboids or that rhomboid on one side to become dysfunctional and annoying for you? So if you want to hang around towards the end of the video, we're going to make sure that you've got a really clear understanding about how to solve it, but then also how to make sure that it goes away and stays away, what's required of you to make this happen going forward. So with that being said, let's get into these 4 steps. So step number 1 is relatively straightforward and relatively obvious, but step number 1 is making sure that you acknowledge that rhomboid pain isn't normal. Now again, that may sound obvious to a lot of people, but there's a lot of people out there who have painful rhomboids or upper back pain, and because so many people tend to have it, we tend to get drawn out of this idea that we shouldn't have it, because if a lot of people do have it, then obviously it becomes more normal to have it. But it's important to understand that in a perfect world, under normal circumstances, nothing should feel sore in your body. Nothing should be tight, nothing should be weak, nothing should be painful especially. So acknowledging that that pain shouldn't be there and valuing that that pain is there is a really important first step to master, because if that rhomboid pain isn't annoying or frustrating enough for you at the moment, then you're not necessarily going to have the motivation to change that going forwards. If it's not stopping you from doing something, or if it's not interrupting your ability to do something that you enjoy, it's unlikely that you're going to take the steps to get rid of this permanently. But if you've arrived at the point that maybe clicking on this video is an acknowledgement that you're ready to take the next steps, acknowledging that that is an issue for you, something that you don't deserve to have and something that you want to go away, is an important first step. Now, step number 2 is a really simple symptomatic relief based exercise. Now we're going to use a lacrosse ball or a tennis ball to do this. So you need to choose the one that feels the most comfortable for you. Obviously a lacrosse ball is a lot harder, a tennis ball is a lot softer. So depending on how painful and tender those rhomboids might be for you, choose the appropriate device that reflects that. Now again, for anyone who doesn't know specifically, the rhomboid muscles attach from your shoulder blade, the inner border of your shoulder blade, onto your rib cage and thoracic spine. Now, one of the things I think gets missed a lot when we're having a conversation about getting rid of muscular-based issues is that we tend to think of it as just a muscular issue. And with that in mind, it leads us down the path of, well, we need to stretch that muscle in order to release it and make it feel better. But clinically, what I find is that for every tight muscle, there is something behind the scenes pulling the strings, making that tight and asking that to be tight. And in this instance, in a lot of cases, stiffness and restrictions in the upper back joints. So if your shoulder blade sits on top of that rib cage, the rhomboids attach from that into your spine and rib cage, then if the rib joints and the spinal joints themselves are stiff, tight, and overloaded, that is a signal that your body needs to either protect or support that overloaded area. So by using a ball, yes, we're going to push the ball into the rhomboid muscle, but we're also hoping to sink underneath that and affect some change in the actual rib joints and the thoracic spinal joints as well. And you'll see that reflected in how we do this, because we're not going to use the ball to dig into those rhomboids around the back and roll around on it. That's not going to be good enough or specific enough to target those deeper underlying rib joints and thoracic spinal joints. So what we want to get you to do instead is, with the ball, we want to place the ball in the middle of your rib cage area, in between your shoulder blades. So my shoulder blade is here, or the spine is here, and the rib cage and in between that's here. So this is where the rhomboids will tend to be. So there's a little bit of trial and error to find where you feel most comfortable here. But I'm going to get you to place the ball in that area and then just gently lie down on top of that. So again, we're not directly on the spine, we're not on the shoulder blade, we're in the middle somewhere. And ultimately, this is where we can almost forget about the rhomboids and just go looking for things that feel stiff, tight, or tender. Now, the important thing about this, as I said, is we're not rolling around. That doesn't do what we want to do here. What I'll get you to do is, if you start down sort of the bottom part of the shoulder blade, where the corner of that shoulder blade is, start right in the middle, roll off. So right in the middle where the spine is, just roll off a little bit. You'll be on the spinal joints. Just let the ball press in for a second, get a sense of how stiff, tight, or tender this may feel, then compare it to the exact same spot on the other side. And for me, in this position, if I'm on the spinous process, the center of that spine, and I roll just off onto the joints a little bit, this particular joint feels a little bit restricted. So because we're on the rib cage, I want to do two things. The first thing is stay here. The second thing is to take a deep breath in. So deep breath into the ball, and then squeeze that on top of the ball, and then relax. And I can keep repeating this process until the tissue over the top and the joint underneath starts to release and give. And then what I want to do from here is if I move it a little bit further off the spine onto the rib cage, I'll now be affecting the rib joint underneath. So again, this might be a little bit more tender for some people, but we're going to repeat the same process. So constant pressure on the ball, take a deep breath into the ball, give that tissue a squeeze over the top for about 5 to 10 seconds, and then relax. Again, keep repeating that process until you feel like it's given and it's released enough. Then again, we just want to keep repeating that process. So back to the middle, right next to the spinous process, the bump in the middle, hit that spinal joint, deep breath in, give it a squeeze, hold for 5 to 10 seconds, and then relax. Keep repeating that until it gives and frees. Then move across into the middle where the ribs are just before you get to the shoulder blade. Deep breath in, give it a squeeze, hold for a few seconds, and then relax. And then keep repeating that process. So as we're doing this, what you'll find is you'll be right in the middle, just off to the side, hitting that in the spinal column, hitting those facet joints, then moving out a little bit wider just before we get to that shoulder blade, spending some time there, working our way all the way up as high as we can find things that need work. We don't necessarily have to do the other side unless you feel like both sides are an issue. But what I always like to say with this exercise or an exercise like this is just double check the other side to make sure that even though you may not have rhomboid related pain here, the stiffness and the restriction here may be causing some dysfunction on the other side. So even though it might be very obvious to just work on the one side, if you have just one-sided pain, just double check that the other side isn't contributing that with some extra stiffness. Because if you're just digging the ball into the tenderness and not getting rid of the restrictions, then again, we're not fixing the underlying cause of that. We're not taking away the reason why that tissue is being asked to be and stay dysfunctional. So that's step 2. So again, freeing up that tissue, but also the underlying rib cage and spinal stiffness can be a really great way to give yourself a clean slate, take off those hidden handbrakes so that tissue can almost reset and feel comfortable again. Now, point number 3, often with these sorts of things, there is a strength or an endurance element to, if not why it's there in the first place, but if you've had this dysfunction for a while, you can end up with less strength and less endurance than you deserve to have. So a really great way to start to reclaim this is with some simple rowing exercises. So I've got a power band. It's attached to something that's not going to move. You can use cables, you can use hand weights, you can use TheraBands. Just make sure that the resistance is enough that you feel you can control this really well. Because what I want to get you to do is, being up nice and tall in a good posture, we're going to get you to pull the band towards you as far as you feel comfortable. Now, what I want to make sure that you do here is we want to make sure that you stop once your elbows come level with your trunk. The reason for that is when you get there, it's much easier to then squeeze your shoulder blades together when your elbows are at your side. Now, if you are relatively advanced with this exercise and you can pull your hands towards your chest so that your elbows go past your trunk and still squeeze your shoulder blades together and get a really strong workout through those rhomboids, among other muscles, then all power to you. But a lot of people might find that when their elbows track past their trunk, it will ask their shoulders to dump forwards into a bad shape. And that'll basically change the orientation of the whole exercise, and it'll be a little bit harder to get those sort of rhomboid muscles to do the work. Now, again, when you're doing this exercise, make sure that you're thinking of pulling those shoulder blades in towards your spine to really engage those muscles along the way. So we can do this same exercise to get a lot of the traps to work, but those rhomboids are also going to have a little bit of a workout in this position as well. So if you're taking the time to free up those rhomboids and mobilize all that stiff tissue, we want to make sure that you do enough of these that you start to fatigue those same muscles so they come back stronger. So again, if you want some more endurance, we need high repetition. So we might be talking 15 to 20 reps, maybe a couple of sets of that. If you want to just build some more strength, you might want to have a little bit more resistance on the band, so maybe go back a little bit. And we're looking more for that sort of 8 to 12 range of reps with a couple of sets as well. But ideally, we want to make sure that the posture and the technique is good. You're squeezing those shoulders back without letting your shoulders dump forwards, just so that you're targeting those muscles specifically. So that's step number 3, adding some strength. Now, the fourth step in this process to eliminating rhomboid pain and discomfort is probably the most important, and it's valuing and recognizing how good your postural habits might be. So what I find clinically, the number one cause of pain and discomfort in the rhomboid area is literally the positions you put that tissue into. So if you take a step back and analyze your day-to-day life, what we're looking for basically is to pick on the shapes and the postures and the positions that you get into the most throughout the day consistently. So for most people, that's probably going to be a computer. If it's your mouse hand that gets dragged away from you and everything basically gets dragged down from that position. So the weight of gravity, the arm gets pulled away. You just get constant tension going through that neck and upper back. The rhomboids can be a part of that process going forward. So if you are in a position where your shoulders are rounding a lot, if you're playing on the computer, if you're playing an instrument, if you sit and drive, if you sit and relax into the couch in this position, if you're consistently dropping and rolling forwards, then you're going to be consistently putting those tissues in your upper back under more stress and tension than they're designed to handle. If you did that one time, your body couldn't care less. It can adapt and it can tolerate anything in a short amount of time. But if this is a consistent thing throughout your day, where it's your work day, it's what you do leisurely, if there's a lot of driving involved, whatever it is, if you can't take a step back and recognize A, what you're spending the most of your time doing, and B, what shape you're in while doing that, then you're potentially going to miss the underlying cause of this whole conversation. So step 4 is recognizing those shapes, and step 4.5 is valuing better shapes. So if you're not then trying to sit down in an up tall position with your shoulders comfortably back and finding a way to move your environment to support that shape, if you're consistently getting dragged out of that position, then this stuff isn't going to go away and stay away for good. It's not given a chance to. But the important thing about this is you may also be fantastically motivated and you know to keep your shoulders back, even if you're reaching around as opposed to being here, and you might sit down and you immediately get into this position. Just double check that after half an hour, 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, you haven't started to gravitate back towards some old habits. Because sometimes that gets missed a little bit, where people start in a good position, give themselves a big tick for the day, but they don't realize that somewhere along the line they drop out of that good shape again. So again, if we can't get you into these better positions long term, it's unrealistic for this tissue to feel like it can normalize going forward. So I hope that was genuinely helpful. Let me know in the comments down below how you found those steps. I find that if you can follow each one of those steps and master each one of those steps, there's very little reason for the rhomboids to stay dysfunctional. You can definitely free them up and make them feel better. You can certainly get them stronger. But if you're not having that postural conversation, then potentially it's all for nothing eventually. So let me know how that goes for you. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. But with that being said, appreciate you watching, and we'll see you in the next one.